We passed a law back in 2009 that set up regional tourism projects where they could go before the state and ask for a tax incentive, if you will, on the sales tax that would be generated by the development of a new tourism destination. And we passed it originally in 2009 to help large projects like NASCAR come out to Aurora. We said there would be 2 projects that we would allow this for, because we don't do just special interest legislation for NASCAR. So there were so many viable projects that came forward to apply for that one other project, and the legislature said, you know, if this makes good sense to do this for one large project or 2 large projects, let's open it up and do 2 per year for a total of 6 over a 3-year period. Well, NASCAR actually is not far enough along in their development to come forward and apply for this. So 6 other projects came forward to apply, and the state took so long in putting together the parameters for what would be required to apply for this RTA tax credit that it went beyond the first year. And so I thought, and many of us thought, well, let's take away that 2 per year cap, and let's say if there are more than 2, let's leave it up to the governor's discretion and the Department of Economic Development to choose 3 or 4 or 6. If there were legitimate projects that could get people on the ground, shovels in the ground, creating jobs and creating wealth in the state of Colorado. In northern Douglas County, here in the South Metro area, we have a very important project that was coming forward. Aurora had a very important project coming forward. 6 projects had made application, which would have created about 1,500 jobs overnight had all of them been accepted. Sounds like a great idea, right? Jobs bill in a recession to create jobs. Passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate with every Republican vote and almost every Democrat vote. It only had 8 no votes in the entire Senate. Went over to the House, passed out of committee unanimously. And then the governor decided he didn't like it because one of his bills didn't get passed in the House. And so he was going to use my great jobs bill to retaliate, and came to this House floor, and every single Democrat voted against the bill. And it still passed and was sent to the governor, and the governor vetoed it, which was unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the entire state of Colorado, but for us here in the South Metro area is very unfortunate, because we could have started construction on 2 pretty major projects in northern Douglas County. Would have brought in immediate jobs. I don't want to be partisan right off the bat, but it was disappointing that we couldn't get that bill signed into law and get the economy starting to move here in the South Metro area. But all in all, there were some great things that happened this legislative session from the jobs front.
I was going to say, one of the things that I have found is that the regulatory environment is becoming an increasingly burdensome environment for our businesses and even some of our state agencies to work within. Going through a recent refinance project right now, as my husband and I are, I can attest to the incredible increase in regulatory requirements and the burden and stress and the sluggishness that it is adding to the industry. And I can tell you that one of the CLEAR Act that went through this year that asks, okay, leave the regulations in place. Once if you've set these regulations in place, leave them in place until the completion of some of these projects, so that businesses can start to understand that the rules that we start with are going to be the rules until we finish at least this project, and so that we're not going to pull the rug out from under you midway through, in this environment. And I think that was a very important thing that we could do to help businesses get, understand that, okay, you're on stable ground at least for the moment, and we're not going to change that. So I think that working on our regulatory environment, and I can tell you that I went out to agencies, businesses, and so forth, and I said, you know, if you've got there's a regulatory hoop that you're having to jump through that's causing you grief, and you can point it back to the state, and if we can find a way to streamline it, reduce it, make your life simpler, especially if it's not having meaningful impact, bring it to me. Let's work on it. And that's something that I'm very passionate about within the business community and even our state agencies.
One other jobs bill that passed it up was an important one, and I think it was close to my heart, certainly, and it was the bill that establishes incentives for film commission, for filming, television commercials, all kinds of films that are to be made in Colorado. For many years, we've had a rather negative climate when it comes to attracting the film business to our state. We compete with New Mexico, who has huge film incentives, and certainly California and North Carolina, Michigan, some of the other states. So finally, because film is also a very special interest of Governor Hickenlooper, he put $300 million in his budget this year for the incentives bill, should it pass. Hopefully, we'll see some films being made in Colorado. I think that it's a tourism issue when people see film commercials and so forth about Colorado that are filmed in Colorado. It's an advertisement for our state. So it was pretty controversial, and many of my Republican colleagues did not support it, but I thought it was a great bill, and hopefully we'll see some films made in Colorado.
I ran a bill this year that didn't get very far, but basically it put a rate cap on Excel. I think that, you know, I've talked about this bill a little bit with some crowds, and I mentioned what the bill does, and many in the crowd spontaneously burst into applause. So, so I think it's something that's a good idea, and I think it's a good jobs bill, because as our utility rates in this state continue to climb, it's almost like a big tax increase. It makes our state that much less attractive for everyone, businesses, consumers, because everyone pays utility bills. And actually, many of you remember Joe Rice, who was in the legislature. He now represents Lockheed Martin. He made a comment recently that had that bill gone through, it would have saved, I think he said, Lockheed about $1 million a year that they could have put into their business and hiring employees. So it's a difficult issue. It's complicated politically, but it's an issue that I think is important. So I will continue to try and work on affordable, reliable energy for the state.
I always enjoy speaking with realtors about job creation and entrepreneurship, because you do it on a daily basis. Everything that you do in your careers in your offices, you are helping move Colorado's economy forward, and you're one of the leading indicators of how our economy is doing. And for better or for worse, that responsibility falls on you, and everything about it falls in your corner. So thank you very much for your work. Thank you for your perseverance. This last legislative session, you heard from both Republicans and Democrats alike that jobs would be the priority. And we started from that very easy place of agreement, and things diverged fairly quickly. What you saw between the two parties was a very different attitude between how we approach a job creation agenda. From the Republican standpoint, and certainly our House Republican standpoint, our agenda was aimed at removing obstacles, clearing the way for small businesses to create jobs, a recognition that in a state where 90% of our businesses employ less than 100 people, understanding that small businesses will lead us out of this recession was absolutely critical to our thought process as we introduced a series of bills that were aimed at removing barriers, clearing obstacles, and making it easier for small businesses to grow and put our friends and neighbors back to work. Our Democratic friends had a very different view toward their jobs agenda, and that was to create hurdles, increase the number of obstacles that small businesses had to face, particularly when it comes to procurement with state contracts, to working with state and local governments, to create those hurdles and make it more difficult to attract jobs and to attract investment to our state. We need to have a comprehensive and fair tax policy. We need to have a consistent regulatory environment. And when we talk about building a better Colorado, when we talk about improving Colorado's economy, it necessarily starts with small businesses and keeping those jobs here. We can attract as many Fortune 500 companies to our state, and I recognize the important value that that has for all of us, and particularly for those of you who are in the housing market. But fundamentally, if we don't keep jobs here, we're not doing our job. And keeping those good careers here in Colorado is what we ought to be doing. So our focus was a little bit different, but I think completely appropriate, and that is to allow small businesses to grow, to put our friends and neighbors back to work, and to help improve our economy for the long term, not just with short-term gimmicks.
I hate appraisal management companies. I do not like Dodd, and I do not like Frank, and I do not like, and I hate their bill. I think it is a disaster for the mortgage industry. I think it's terrible for the real estate industry. I did not vote for the bill because I don't believe in making a bad situation worse. And what we need to do as an industry and as a state legislature is strongly encourage our congressional delegation to repeal Dodd-Frank and lessen the restrictions that we have on the industry, because I believe that one of the biggest impediments that we have to getting our economy going again is some of the over-regulation that Congress has put on our industry. The pendulum always swings. When the economy is going great and everything is going wonderful, you have regulators and you have lawmakers and you have rule makers take their foot off of the brakes and say, everybody go crazy. But as soon as the economy starts to tighten up and things start to get a little crazy because they didn't watch close enough, then they try to compensate for that by over-regulating. And I think that that is what you have seen. You have seen in the 90s and early 2000s, regulators turning their eyes and letting things go through that shouldn't have gone through. And then you saw what we had in 2008, and you had Congress try to compensate for that by saying that they're doing something good, which Congress seldom does. And that is what we have with the Dodd-Frank bill. But it does say that if you don't have an appropriately appraised house, you cannot sell that mortgage to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So if that's the case, then we have to abide by what the Congress has dictated. But I think it's terrible for the industry. It's going to be far more cumbersome than it needs to be, and it's killing appraisers. You all aren't appraisers, but the appraisers are the ones getting hurt in the long run. So I think we need to do everything we can to tell Congress to fix what they've broken.
You know, it's interesting to me that the federal government, in my mind, was responsible for creating much of this problem with Barney Frank, you know, forcing lenders to lend to people who are completely unqualified to be buying homes. And then when what you can easily predict happens, that people don't pay the mortgages back, prices go way up based on this inflated demand, the market collapses. Who does the government blame? It blames you guys for what the problem it created in the first place. So I'll just add to what Ted said, but I voted against it because I just felt it was another overreach by the federal government telling us what to do in the state. So I was very much opposed to the bill.
I hope that we can find agreement on the fact that Colorado's energy resources provide us with a remarkable opportunity for an enhanced and sustainable economic improvement in our economic environment. We sit on really what is the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We have the ability to tap into that, not only provide an energy resource for our state and for our country, but also from a national security standpoint, we have the opportunity to produce our homegrown energy and begin the process of ending imports of foreign oil. Now, I recognize that much of what we use here comes from our friends in Canada, and I'm not too much concerned about the foreign policy implications of us having that relationship with Canada, but when you talk about the instability in the Middle East, and when you talk about other geopolitical factors, it makes a great deal of sense from that standpoint for us to develop our own natural resources here. From an economic standpoint, the communities, the counties, the areas of our state that have embraced the responsible development of our energy resources are doing very, very well. And that's not a coincidence. We have the technology, natural gas companies, investors, entrepreneurs have the technology to responsibly move that resource from underneath our feet into gas pipelines, into our vehicles, and into our economy, and it turns into jobs, and it turns into homes being sold, commercial properties being rented, buildings being built, all because of that resource underneath our feet. This last legislative session, we did stop bills that would have really put a stranglehold on energy development in Colorado. One of the challenges we have going forward, though, is this patchwork of regulations from county to county and from state to state, from county to county and from municipality to municipality, that does create a challenge for our state. And it is one issue that I believe we do have to address, and that is restoring the historic relationship on regulating energy development between state and local governments. I understand that local governments have an important role to play, that they have done that historically, but what we see now is an encroachment on state regulatory authority, and the end result is inconsistent regulation across these natural gas fields that makes it more and more difficult for these energy companies to justify the investment in our state. The other thing that I would ask, and it has been brought up by many members of our caucus, including Representative Swalman, Conti, and Representative Scott, is we need leadership on the question of responsibly developing our federal lands. While we see energy production increasing in northeast Colorado on private lands, we see energy development decreasing on federal lands, and that's a problem. None of you do business in Grand Junction, but when you travel to Grand Junction, you see homes for sale that have been on the market for an overly extended period of time. You see storefronts that are empty. You see commercial properties that are unused that 5 years ago were going great guns. The economy was doing great. Home sales were up. Property values were up. We have two companies in this state that have said they would invest billions of dollars into developing the former naval oil shale reserve northeast of Grand Junction. Federal government won't let them. It's tied up in court. Other states, through the leadership of their governor and their state legislatures, are developing federal lands responsibly. Our governor has sat on the sidelines, has turned a blind eye toward developing those resources in northwest Colorado, and that's a problem. It's a problem for those economies in rural Colorado, but it's also a problem for our state. When we see our neighbors developing these resources and our governor chooses not to engage in the discussions that would lead to that responsible development, to not impress upon Ken Salazar, our Interior Secretary, who, oh, by the way, happens to be from Colorado, how important and critical it is to develop those energy resources in our state, we have a problem. So that type of leadership from our governor is absolutely necessary. Our House Republicans, along with our Senate Republican colleagues, have been crystal clear on our support for the responsible development of energy production and the economic benefits that come from that, and also the need for a consistent statewide policy on the development of our energy resources. So hopefully it isn't an issue that we will be able to address next legislative session. We simply couldn't get there this last session because of a number of things that happened with our friends in the Senate, but that will be for next year.
You should be interested in the development of natural resources in our communities, but you should not be concerned about fracking in your communities. Fracking has been done throughout the world for decades and has been done in Colorado for decades. And as Governor Hickenlooper said yesterday at a renewable energy summit, quote, "I was personally involved with 50 to 60 fracked wells. There have been tens of thousands of wells in Colorado, and we can't find anywhere in Colorado a single example of the process of fracking that has polluted groundwater." And that's a fact. So when you talk to your fellow realtors, when you talk to your clients, when you talk to communities of interest around the area that are now seeing oil and gas development that when they have never seen it before, please tell them that we have been doing this in Weld County for decades, and we haven't had any problem. We've been doing this on the western slope for decades, and we haven't had any problem. There is a strong, strong, strong effort by the radical environmentalists to make sure that we do not have any oil and gas exploration anywhere in the United States. And they are trying to gin that up at the local level to scare the heck out of people about living near an oil well or a gas well because of what fracking might do to their groundwater. Please understand, not only has there not been a case in Colorado, there has never been a case anywhere in the United States that has been linked to fracking of pollution of groundwater, ever, in the 3 or 4 decades that we have been doing it.
Much as we all appreciate and respect the county commissioners and their ability to be able to do their job, which they always like to have the ability to do at the lowest local level, and I understand and appreciate that, we still have a responsibility at the state level to support the industry, as far as I'm concerned, and I think everyone on the panel would agree that we need to support the industry for the reasons that we've just heard this afternoon from the panel. But I don't know how it'll be resolved. Perhaps those who are going to be in the legislature next year have some ideas about how to resolve the differences. And maybe we just can't resolve it. Maybe we're going to have to decide at the state level what's going to happen, and our county commissioners are going to have to just understand that we can't have a patchwork of regulations all over the state of Colorado when it comes to the very important issue of energy in our state.
We've started down the road of state regulations and state regulating the oil and gas industry. And back in 2007, you may or may not be aware, we were ranked as the #1 most friendly place to drill in the world. And 2 years later, 2009, we dropped from #1 to number 66. This is by an independent ranking institute that ranks on a worldwide basis. We dropped in the world. It's a world ranking. Places in the world to drill. And with this, we saw a huge plummet in our severance taxes in the state. We watched that drop by more than $200 million. And that was one of the favorite pots that our legislature used to love to steal from to fund schools and a whole plethora of other wonderful things. So that money was not there. And I can tell you that we watched, and as I sat on the Western Slope at some energy summits last year, and I talked to an oil executive in my research on this, and I talked to an executive from company which I will not name, but I had done research, and I know for the fact that they have 11 active rigs operating in the state of Colorado, and I know that they do not intend to add any more for the foreseeable future. They're just hoping to maintain. And I asked him, I said, tell me, what did you guys pay out in regulatory requirements and compliance in the state of Colorado last year in order to comply with the regulations right now that just the state makes you jump through? $29 million on 11 rigs currently operating in the state of Colorado in a year. And so then they came to us and said, we'd like to let the counties weigh in on this as well. We'd like to add just another layer of regulations. And we absolutely could not go there. While I support our counties and our cities being able to have liaisons at the state and being able to talk to the COGCC and tell them about the specific things in their counties, and I support a strong communicative environment. We cannot allow our another 20 layers. When Arapahoe County was thinking about getting into this, their boilerplate regulatory packet was now up to 21 pages before they decided, wait a minute, we're going too far and maybe we better back off of this. So I think, it's a dangerous, we all want to protect, we all want clean water, we all want clean air, We all want clean land, but we also want jobs. And so we need to strike a balance between there.
Hydraulic fracturing, Senator Harvey did a very good job of explaining the use of it and the practice itself. Though the governor and I have not always found agreement on natural resource issues, and I believe that he ought to show more leadership on the question than he has, one area where it is right to give him credit is on the common ground that he was able to help find on disclosure of components of hydraulic fracturing fluid. Brought the environmentalists together with industry representatives, company representatives, and did find common ground on what ought to be disclosed so that those regulations could be adopted by our state Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. As the BLM and the federal BLM and Environmental Protection Agency are looking at their own disclosure requirements, they would be well served to look at what Colorado did. We did manage to find that common ground between two opposing interests, and we're able to adopt it on the state basis. And if the BLM and the EPA did it on a federal basis, it would allow that higher level of consistency that companies need, whether they're doing business in Colorado or Utah or Wyoming, and would allow for the continuing safe use of hydraulic fracturing to provide that much-needed energy resource to Colorado and to our country.
I have actively monitored the discussions that are going on with the C470 coalition. I think that it's headed up at the Southeast Business Partnership. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of those organizations. Several years ago, they looked at improving C470, and obviously that is a key road system for this part of the metro area. And it fell apart because Douglas County and Arapahoe County, they were looking at some tolling options and things like that, and it just fell apart. But now I'm very encouraged that the counties are beginning to work together. Again, I've participated in these meetings. They're right now in the they've hired some, is it Mary Berry, Maria Garcia Berry, her firm, to begin doing outreach to people down in this part of the counties to look at what we should do. That you guys know that roadway is basically a parking lot during rush hour. We've got to improve that. State really, I don't know where this money's going to come from the state. I have to confess that I think we ought to be looking at managed tollways like they have up on the north side of town, the I-25, and I think they're looking at on the Boulder-Denver Turnpike, maybe some optional tolled lanes to improve the situation, but they're going to look at all options, maybe regional taxing districts or things like that. But I would encourage you folks to follow what they're doing there and decide what you think about it, and because we need to do something, I believe, to improve transportation down in this end of town.
It's not only an issue of improving transportation in the E470 corridor in this end of town, but all over the state of Colorado. When you look at the condition that our roads and bridges are in, I understand now that our bridges are now, many of them being rebuilt with the faster money, which was the tax hike that you all loved when you went to register your cars. Unfortunately, that is still there, and will continue, I suppose, to reap the benefits of that tax increase by being able to continue to rebuild bridges, but it doesn't do much for the state of our highways. I think the only place I've driven lately that's worse than Colorado is California. Look at their economic mess that they're in.
Transportation is critically important, and it is undervalued as a public policy concern. I view it through the lens of economic development. If we don't have a transportation infrastructure that moves people, goods, and services safely and efficiently throughout and across the four corners of this state, our economy is going to suffer because of it. How much, for how long, those are variables that none of us can answer, but we do know that when employers look to locate, they look at residential neighborhoods. How long does it take to get from a community like Highlands Ranch to an office in the tech center, or how long does it take to get from Broomfield to Interlochen, or from Broomfield to Metro Denver, to downtown Denver? So from that standpoint, it really is an economic development tool and something that we need to invest in. In the past, we had resources available for transportation funding because we had a spillover. And we had a spillover into capital construction and into roads and bridges that, when the economy was good, and we invested in improving our roads and bridges and invested in building that capacity. That spillover was lost. Doesn't exist. When the state started into this recession, the first $500 or $600 million that was cut, nobody noticed, unless you were building roads and bridges, because that money came straight out of that type of investment in our infrastructure. That's a problem. We passed a bill through the House and sent it over to the Senate that would have recreated that spillover into transportation and capital construction, and it died an unceremonious death in the state Senate. And that's unfortunate, because we recognize the need that we have to fund transportation infrastructure. Bonding has been used and likely will be used on a project-specific basis, but it's not a solution to long-term structural financing for transportation projects. From my standpoint, and I will say even our House Republicans are not necessarily in agreement on this, but from my standpoint, until we talk about any revenue enhancements for transportation, the state of Colorado has to show a commitment to this public policy concern by investing general tax dollars into roads and bridges. Not one dime of your income tax or the sales taxes that goes to the state of Colorado is turned into road safety enhancements, building new bridges, putting up guardrails. It all comes out of the Highway Users Tax Fund from our gas taxes, the federal part of those gas taxes, and from what we now know as faster fees. That's not the right way to do it. If it really is a significant public policy concern, which I believe that it is, then we must have an investment of general fund revenues toward that and show our commitment to economic recovery. We can do it, we should do it, and it needs to be a priority, and it is something that we will continue to dog from our House Republican standpoint, because it is important for us to show that investment and to show that commitment.
You know, we see this more and more where there's unfortunate, you know, we ask more and more of our lenders, and then when they're slow to give, you know, credit back, you know, when people need investment capital, you know, we don't understand, and it's a double-edged sword. So I really do, it's unfortunate when people are in a status where their income is down, where they're not able to make their mortgage. You'd like to think that they had qualified for that home as they should have. Unfortunately, as we all know, in many too many circumstances, that wasn't the case, and that there were a lot of loans that were going out there that probably should have never been made. And this is how we wound ourselves up in this, and it's a, you know, and I think now Dodd-Frank has kind of swung us back the other direction, you know, tightening to the point of foreclosure. I know I've got friends that have never missed a payment on commercial investments that they have made, and now the bank is calling the loan due because the property has dropped in value, and the loan is now out of margin. And so, despite the fact that they've never missed a payment, bank's calling it due, and it's happening. You know, and so I really do believe that this is some of those big, you know, Dodd-Frank rules that are coming now down to our independent banking level that are really hurting the little guy. And I'll tell you, it's an ongoing problem that we deal with. And while I'm certainly sympathetic to those folks who are struggling and going through the foreclosure process, and I would hope that there could be room within, you know, an independent evaluation basis between the mortgage lender and the homeowner, that if more time will fix the problem, that time would be given, and that we don't need federal regulators weighing in saying that you can't give that time. And that's where I think, you know, independent processing and looking at situations is very critical.
Here's what I'd like to see. I think we need to have a clear rule of law so that lenders and homeowners really know who has title and who's entitled to foreclose. But I also think that the process needs to move more quickly. You are all aware of the shadow inventory that hangs over the housing market. And a lot of that is because these houses are kind of neither here nor there, twixt and between, and so that's depressing the housing market. So, you know, I've read articles about, I think there's an unholy alliance between Washington, the politicians back there, and the big mega banks that have been bailed out, and I know you guys are all aware of that, but I'd really like to see that we have a very clear chain of title, who's really entitled to foreclose, and that the whole process, if it could be done, move more quickly. Sort of, that's kind of where I came down on that bill.
I think this is another example of that pendulum going from one side to the other. When you had banks signing documents electronically without looking at the paperwork, and those electronic signatures were not signed where they needed to be signed, though the loan was made out to who actually applied for the loan, and the money was given to them, and they bought the house, those banks signed the paperwork wrong. And because those banks signed the paperwork wrong, quote, there is a shadow over the title of that house. I don't think anybody is in disagreement that the bank lent the money and the person borrowed the money. I think there is a problem with the way that the paperwork was electronically signed. But the reason why we're having bills like this come forward is to deal with that issue, to say that the bank screwed up, and so therefore the state, in its infinite wisdom, must get involved to fix that problem. It already takes 12 months on average for a bank to foreclose on somebody from the time they make their last payment to the time they actually are moved out of their property. That is hurting the entire housing market by having that kind of a delay. And then when you have a class action lawsuit by attorney generals across the state, across the country, to go after these banks because of this problem with electronic signatures, those banks are holding up letting all of those homes out, even if it's gone beyond the 12 months. And the shadow inventory that Spencer was talking about is true. They've finalized that lawsuit, and the banks are starting to loosen up all of those homes. I'm worried about where the housing market is going to go in the next 6 months to 12 months. We are just now seeing us get out from underneath the inventory that we've had over the last several years. I think the banks are going to start dumping those properties on the market again, and we should have done that a year ago. We should have done that 2 years ago so that we would be through it and we could start building our economy back up. I think this is going to be slowing our economy back down even more, and it's all because of, I believe, government failure from the get-go, and now it's government overregulation to try to fix something they screwed up in the first place. So vote no, and keep your eyes on the legislature, because every year there are certain do-gooder legislators down there that think they know better how to control the free market better than the invisible hand does. So keep an eye on what's going on down there.